On a quiet suburban street built for safety, routine, and family mornings, a truth long buried finally begins to surface. A trusted mail carrier who greeted families by name. A missing young woman whose car once sat abandoned under dim security lights. A case that outlived old technology until new science reached back through time and refused to stay silent. A life lived in plain sight, wrapped in routine and community trust, now pulled apart by the weight of what justice remembers. Everything begins here, in a neighborhood designed to keep nightmares far away. On the morning that illusion finally breaks, what happens when the man who brings your mail has been carrying a 21-year secret all along? Then how does a city built to be perfect confront the truth that danger was walking on its sidewalks every single day? If you want to discover the truth behind this mystery, like this video, subscribe to Unscripted Tales, and turn on the bell icon so you do not miss the upcoming parts of this investigation. Tell me in the comments from which city you are watching this cold case story. Let us reach 5,000 likes to continue this series. It is a crisp October morning in Irvine when Detective Amanda Walsh stands at the edge of a driveway on Wind Chime Lane. Her partner, Detective David Rodriguez, steps out of a modest two-story house guiding Kenneth Fraser in handcuffs. There is no shouting, no struggle, only the quiet shock of a moment that will change how an entire neighborhood sleeps at night. Neighbors gather on sidewalks, coffee mugs forgotten in their hands. Children on their way to school slow their steps and look to confused parents who have no words ready for this kind of morning. This is Irvine, a place that has been marketed for decades as America's safest city, a planned paradise where streets curve neatly and community parks promise peace. Yet here, on a street named for soft sounds and gentle breezes, the image of safety cracks wide open. The mail truck sits at the curb with envelopes neatly stacked inside, as if the routine of delivery might resume after this brief interruption. Fraser keeps his eyes lowered, his postal uniform clean, his shoulders tired rather than defiant. For years he waved at doorsteps, remembered birthdays, and greeted pets by name. Today he walks toward an unmarked police car. Amanda Walsh scans the scene. A flag hangs quietly from the porch. Plastic pumpkins line a walkway ready for Halloween smiles. A morning newspaper rests untouched in the driveway. Details that once meant normal life now feel heavy, as if each one has been holding its breath for 21 years. She sees trimmed hedges, a tidy garden where tomato vines lean toward the sun, and a garage space organized with careful pride. These are the pieces of a life that told everyone he was safe, predictable, trustworthy. The neighborhood watches in stunned silence. Someone lifts a phone to record what they will later replay again and again, trying to understand how the world changed in a single morning. The illusion of safety trembles. The idea that danger always comes from somewhere else, never from the man who waves as he walks up your driveway, begins to fade. Police lights flash softly across perfectly painted fences and manicured lawns, exposing the truth no city slogan can erase. As the patrol car pulls away, daily life tries to reclaim the street. Sprinklers click on. A dog barks. A homeowner bends to collect a fallen newspaper. But Amanda Walsh stays a moment longer, committing the scene to memory. The cuffs, the mail truck, the stunned faces, the quiet that feels heavier than sirens. The safest city in the country will continue its life, but nothing on Wind Chime Lane will ever feel fully ordinary again. Irvine was never meant to feel uncertain. It was designed from blueprint to breathing neighborhood as a place where danger stayed outside invisible walls. Streets curved in soft crescents, each turn planned to slow cars and calm minds. Parks sat like green anchors between homes, inviting families to gather under tall trees and warm evening skies. Wide sidewalks encouraged neighbors to stroll and wave, to talk about school pickups and weekend plans. Everything here had a purpose. Everything here was meant to say you are safe. Police patrols glided through these neighborhoods like quiet guardians. Calls were answered quickly, usually for nothing more than unfamiliar salespeople or a car parked too long at the curb. Crime statistics sat proudly at the bottom of real estate brochures. New residents arrived believing they had escaped the chaos of other places. They trusted the structure, the planning, the promise that nothing terrible could hide behind trimmed hedges and friendly greetings. People waved at each other while watering lawns. Parents walked children to school with confidence. Mailboxes were left unlocked because everyone believed the same story. In a city built this carefully, chaos had no place to stand. That belief made the morning on Windchime Lane feel unreal. As the police cars rolled away and the quiet tried to return, the truth settled slowly into the minds of the neighbors. All the planning, all the design, all the perfect streets and perfect parks had not kept the darkness out. It had simply learned how to blend in. The most trusted figure on the block, the one who knew every doorway and every schedule, had walked these sidewalks not just with envelopes, but with a secret 21 years long. Safety had been real here, but it had also been a mask. And a mask that looked so clean no one thought to lift it. In a place built to remove surprise, the greatest shock was discovering that evil had followed all the rules. It followed the speed limit. It waved politely. It delivered birthday cards and holiday parcels, and yet carried a truth heavy enough to break an entire community's certainty in a single morning. Some illusions fade slowly. Others shatter all at once. And now questions whispered behind closed doors rise louder in every home if safety here could be broken. What else had been quietly waiting to be uncovered next? Kenneth Fraser looked like the kind of man you would trust without a second thought. 54 years old, soft lines around his eyes from California sun, hair graying at the temples. A father of 2 children who played in the same parks as everyone else's children. A youth soccer coach who tied loose shoelaces and cheered for the most uncoordinated players with the same encouragement as the strongest ones. He lived in a modest house with a neat lawn and a little vegetable garden on the side. Tomatoes climbing up wooden stakes and a small lemon tree planted near the fence. Inside his garage sat a clean workbench, tools arranged with quiet pride. A bicycle wheel hung from a hook, as if he had recently fixed a tire for a neighbor's child. Everything about him fit perfectly into the rhythm of Irvine life. The kind of place where people waved when they drove by, where trust was not earned over time but offered freely at the first smile. That was what made this moment so unsettling. The uniform he wore each day, crisp and familiar, once symbolized reliability. His route was predictable, his greetings warm, his presence comforting on quiet weekdays when streets belonged only to sunlight and delivery trucks. Yet now Detective Amanda Walsh watched him through the rear window of a patrol car as it disappeared down the street, and she felt a chill that did not match the weather. How many mornings had this man walked from mailbox to mailbox while carrying a truth that would destroy the peace of this community? How many families had thanked him, trusted him, even relied on him, never knowing the weight hidden behind his calm smile? The contrast felt almost fragile, as if the world had been balanced delicately between 2 versions of the same person. One who delivered packages on time, one who had walked away from a terrible act and built a new life over it like fresh paint over a crack in a wall. Walsh tried to understand the split she saw. If someone can live peacefully for 20 years after doing something unthinkable, what does that say about the masks people can wear? Can a person be both the helpful coach on the field and the man who kept a truth as heavy as this one? That question sat heavy in her chest as she imagined the faces of parents who had trusted him with their children, and the quiet shock that would ripple through every home he had ever approached with a stack of envelopes in his hand. Even the wind on Windchime Lane seemed to hesitate, as if the neighborhood itself was trying to adjust to this new reality. The man everyone thought they knew had been someone else all along. In a place that designed safety so carefully, the greatest threat had come with a friendly wave and a uniform people believed in. And as Amanda Walsh turned away, one thought refused to leave her mind. If someone so ordinary could conceal something so dark, what other secrets were still walking quietly through the safest streets in America? Long before handcuffs clicked on Windchime Lane, there was a young woman whose life traced a very different route through this same city. Her name was Jessica Hamilton. She was 23 years old, steady in her habits, careful with her future. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office in Tustin, saving her earnings to finish her degree at the University of California, Irvine. She wanted to become a teacher, someone who brought confidence and patience into classrooms the way she did in her everyday life. Jessica lived with her older sister Patricia in a small apartment on Culver Drive, one of the few places still affordable in a city growing faster each year. The sisters shared a quiet routine. Each night before Patricia left for her nursing shift at the hospital, she would call Jessica just to check in. It was their simple safety ritual, a habit built on trust and care. Jessica never missed it, until one evening in August of 2001. At 6:30, Patricia called like always. Jessica did not answer. The call rolled to voicemail, and Patricia left a message that would later be preserved for decades as evidence. That message, warm and ordinary, suddenly became the first clue that something had gone terribly wrong. Jessica did not return the call. She did not show up for her shift the next morning. She did not send a text or leave a note. 3 days later, her Honda Civic was found at the Irvine Spectrum Center. The car door was locked, the purse inside with her wallet, identification, and a small amount of cash untouched. There were no signs of a struggle inside the car. No broken glass, no obvious fingerprint that pointed to an answer. It looked as though she had simply driven there, locked the door and vanished into the night. Security cameras existed then, but they were nothing like they are today. The footage from that evening was grainy and unclear, capturing little more than moving shadows and blurred figures. The technology could not sharpen the truth. It could not say who walked past the Civic, who lingered near it, who disappeared into the darkness. Every frame felt like a question without a voice. Volunteers searched, flyers spread across community boards, and families prayed for a lead. Jessica's smile appeared on posters along sidewalks built for peace, not fear. A responsible young woman had vanished, and there was no sign of where she had gone or who had crossed her path. In a city designed to predict every detail, her disappearance offered no pattern. No warning. No clue that would tie her life to the quiet street where a mail carrier would one day be led away in handcuffs. The story had already begun and no one knew it yet, and as that car sat under dim lights, untouched evidence waiting for science that did not exist yet, one chilling thought lingers: what truly happened the moment Jessica Hamilton stepped into the night and never came home again. When Jessica vanished, the case fell into the hands of Detective Robert Thompson, a steady and seasoned investigator who had seen heartbreak in many forms, but rarely in a city like this. Irvine was a place where cases usually had clean endings. Here, missing people came home. Here, danger always felt temporary, like a cloud passing over a bright sky. But this time nothing was ordinary. Nothing was simple. Thompson walked every step of Jessica's last known path. He stood at the Spectrum parking lot, looking at her Civic locked and still, as if waiting for her to return. Inside the car, nothing pointed toward violence. No torn fabric, no shattered glass. Just everyday items of a young woman planning her future, untouched and silent. It was as if the world had paused around her belongings, but she had been removed without leaving a trace. Forensic teams dusted every surface. They lifted fingerprints, but August heat and time had already blurred the story. Most prints matched Jessica and her sister. Others were partial, faded, and frustratingly unusable. DNA tech then could not speak the language it speaks now. What was collected remained whisper thin, offering presence without identity, evidence without a voice. It was not enough to hold on to. Security cameras offered little comfort. The footage from that night looked like ghosts in motion, outlines drifting under dim lights, faces blurred beyond recognition. The guard on duty remembered nothing unusual. Cars arrived, cars left. Footsteps passed through the lot under a humid summer sky. Nothing stood out, because the truth often hides in moments that look like nothing at all. While investigators chased every thread they could find, the community moved with urgency. Volunteers walked through open fields where new neighborhoods were still only blueprints. They searched dusty trails along the edge of construction sites and quiet creek beds that wound through untouched land. Flyers clung to lampposts, hope mixed with fear, and families prayed each time the phone rang that there would be news. Tips poured in, sightings that led nowhere, calls from well-meaning strangers. People convinced they saw her at a gas station, a bus stop, a mall across the county. Every lead, every whisper, every theory was checked, tested, and then slowly set aside. The weeks stretched. The energy thinned. What began as a rush of action slowly turned into a painful waiting. And in that waiting, something heavy settled into the case file. Detective Thompson held on longer than most would. He kept pushing. But as months passed and new cases demanded attention, Jessica's file moved from the front of his desk to a drawer, then to a shelf, and eventually to the quiet corner where cold cases live, not forgotten but suspended in time. The hard truth was clear. Evidence had not failed, technology had. The answers were there, but the tools were not ready to find them. Irvine grew. Streets expanded. New homes rose over the land where volunteers once searched. Life continued. Yet somewhere between memory and silence, Jessica's story waited, untouched like the locked car in that parking lot, holding a secret no one could unlock. And as the city moved forward, unseen by everyone, one man walked mail routes and greeted families each morning, carrying a truth that still waited for the day it would finally be forced into the light. For months after Jessica disappeared, Detective Robert Thompson did something most officers do not usually do. Every Tuesday evening, without fail, he called Patricia Hamilton. Sometimes he had a new detail to share. Sometimes he had nothing but hope to offer. And slowly, week by week, the tone of those calls began to change. In the beginning, Patricia answered with strength. She asked questions with determination. She took notes, she repeated clues, she organized flyers, and she fought sleep just to keep searching one more night. But time is heavy. Hope, when stretched too long, begins to fray. And every Tuesday, Thompson could hear it in her voice. A pause that grew longer before she asked if there was anything new. A deeper breath when she tried to sound steady. A quiet tremble that could not be hidden when she thanked him for trying. The detective carried that voice with him like a weight. He kept Jessica's file on his desk, longer than protocol expected. He reopened pages that he had already studied dozens of times. Some nights, long after the office emptied and the building lights dimmed, he sat alone flipping through the reports, believing that maybe, just maybe, a detail would reveal itself to him in the quiet. But answers did not come. And in January 2004, the case moved officially into the cold files. The binder was thick, its tabs worn, its edges soft from hours of hands and hope. When it slid into the cold case cabinet, the sound felt final, like the soft closing of a chapter that no one wanted to end this way. Yet even then, Thompson could not fully let go. Every few months he returned to the file, pulling it back onto his desk, scanning old statements, rereading lab reports, replaying the security footage in his mind. He replayed the voicemail that Patricia left on the night her sister vanished. He remembered the posters on lampposts. He remembered the search volunteers stomping through weeds under the summer sun. Jessica never stayed gone from his thoughts. She simply moved into a quieter place in his mind, where unsolved things live and wait. While the investigation cooled, the city did not. Irvine kept growing. Construction cranes replaced open fields. Coffee shops opened in what once were vacant lots. Families moved into townhomes built over places where volunteers had once walked shoulder to shoulder, calling Jessica's name. New residents strolled past fountains and palm trees, unaware that a mystery lay beneath the surface of their quiet streets. Time pushed forward. But grief does not follow city planning. Patricia did not move on just because the world around her did. Birthdays came. Holidays passed. She continued working, continued hoping, continued answering the phone on Tuesdays, even when calls stopped coming as often. She learned to carry pain in silence, the way some people carry photographs in their pockets. Always close, always present. In a city that believed nothing terrible could remain hidden, one truth still waited patiently, buried in files, buried in memory, buried in the soil of a story that felt unfinished. And while Irvine kept shining on the outside, the question lingered quietly in the shadows of one grieving sister's heart. Who took Jessica? And how long would it be until the truth finally surfaced? While Jessica's case faded into storage drawers and quiet hallways, life in Irvine continued to shape itself neatly around the illusion of safety. And in the background of that moving world, Kenneth Fraser slipped easily into a role that allowed him to blend in without question. In 2002, just months after Jessica's disappearance had turned from urgent investigation to painful mystery, the United States Postal Service brought in new workers to keep up with the city's rapid growth. Kenneth was among them. He put on a uniform, learned addresses and names, and began carrying envelopes through neighborhoods still grieving silently for a woman whose story felt unfinished. He walked streets where volunteers once searched, past apartment buildings where flyers once fluttered on notice boards, and day by day, step by step, he became part of daily life in Irvine. He delivered birthday cards, insurance notices, college acceptance envelopes, and handwritten letters from parents and grandparents. He learned when families left for work, when children returned from school, which houses left treats out for the mail carrier during holidays. He became familiar, predictable, a presence people trusted without ever thinking to question why. Residents waved from porches. Children smiled at him from bicycles. Some neighbors even left cold water bottles on hot summer afternoons. To everyone around him, he was the picture of reliability. A polite man who showed up every morning, followed routine, and treated the community with care. The kind of person who knew the heartbeat of a neighborhood, not through rumor or curiosity, but through simple, consistent presence. In 2004, he married a woman he met years earlier, a gentle and hopeful beginning to what seemed like a normal suburban life. Together they built a small but peaceful home. Barbecues in the backyard, weekend grocery runs, quiet evenings on the porch. They talked about starting a family, saved for the future, and waved at toddlers walking by with juice boxes and sticky hands. No one thought twice. No one imagined he carried a past that lived in silence. He joined youth soccer as a volunteer coach, teaching 8- and 9-year-olds how to pass the ball, how to cheer for one another, how to keep trying when they missed the goal. Parents praised his patience. Children trusted his encouragement. He seemed like the kind of person who made communities stronger just by being present. Yet behind that calm smile lived a wall that no one could see. Psychologists would later study his case and say that his life was not built on manipulation in the way some criminals hide intention. Instead, it was something stranger, something quieter, a mind that split its truth into locked compartments, separating the man who helped children tie their cleats from the man who once drove down a dark road with a choice he could never undo. He did not run. He did not boast. He simply lived. As if by playing the role of a good man long enough, the past would dissolve into the careful routine of each new morning. But secrets do not disappear just because time passes. They wait. They breathe quietly beneath everyday footsteps, beneath friendly waves, beneath morning routes where trust is given freely. And slowly, as years went by, a truth buried in silence began preparing itself to surface. One day, without warning, the calm life Kenneth built would crack, and everything hidden behind his practiced routine would step forward into the light waiting just beyond the edge of his perfect suburban world. Years passed. Streets filled with new families. Children who once saw Kenneth deliver mail grew into teenagers. Life in Irvine continued to look spotless on the surface, perfectly arranged like a magazine cover. But in a quiet evidence vault, inside carefully sealed boxes marked with dates and case numbers, Jessica Hamilton's story waited. Time had moved, but her file waited for science to catch up to truth. By 2021, technology had grown sharper, stronger, relentless in ways investigators from 2001 could only dream about. That year, a forensic scientist named Dr. Caroline Mitchell began reviewing long-frozen evidence from old cases that still whispered for answers. She was known for working with the impossible. Trace DNA that earlier labs called unusable. Samples so small they once looked meaningless. Dr. Mitchell believed that even the smallest fragment could speak, if given the right tools. Jessica's case box landed on her table. Inside were carefully preserved items from the Civic, still sealed as if waiting for this exact moment. Among them, a tiny hair fragment once dismissed for being too degraded. Back in 2001, it had been evidence without a voice. In 2021, it became something else entirely. Modern amplification pulled a partial genetic profile from what was once considered useless. It was not enough for a full identification, but it was enough to say something chilling. The DNA did not belong to Jessica. It did not belong to her sister. It belonged to an unknown individual who had been inside her car around the time she vanished. The profile was uploaded into CODIS. The National DNA Database searched, compared, cross-checked every entry it held. Result: no match. Whoever this DNA belonged to had never been arrested for a serious offense, had never been placed into the system, had managed to move through life without the shadow of suspicion ever touching them. That could have been the end again. Another lead, almost found, almost lost, but this time, forensic science had evolved beyond waiting. Dr. Mitchell and her team turned to something new, powerful and controversial at the time: genetic genealogy. Instead of searching for the exact person, they searched for relatives, tree branches instead of one leaf, A map of bloodlines instead of a single name. Weeks turned into months. A specialist built family charts stretching back generations, tracing connections through public genealogy databases, marriage records, obituaries, and historical archives. Piece by piece, they narrowed possibilities. A cluster of relatives pointed toward Southern California. Several lines converged. Among them were men who would have been in their 20s in 2001, men who lived within driving distance, men whose lives overlapped with Jessica's world without ever coming into focus. Names began to form. Not conclusions yet, not proof, but shadows turning into shapes. And in that slow, methodical process, a familiar surname appeared. One that lived quietly among perfectly trimmed lawns and silent secrets. A name tied not to suspicion, but to trust. A name that had delivered mail, waved at neighbors, and lived a life built on routine. The truth had begun to move again, and this time, nothing would stop it from reaching daylight, because the strands of DNA had finally started to pull at the mask one man had worn for 20 long years, and soon, investigators would look directly into the life he built and ask, who really was Kenneth Fraser? Once the DNA tree narrowed, the file was handed to someone who understood both patience and pressure. Detective Amanda Walsh, calm, observant, and relentless. She did not announce her involvement. She did not knock loudly or flash her badge. She entered the case like a whisper. Knowing that one wrong step could scare the truth back into hiding, her job was simple in words and complex in practice. Find the living branch of that genetic line. Quietly, carefully. Without warning the person who might have been holding a secret for 2 decades, she started cross-checking names, age, location, military service records, employment, anyone who could have crossed paths with Jessica Hamilton in 2001, and then a name surfaced. A familiar resident of Orange County, a man who had lived just miles from where Jessica disappeared, a man who entered public service not long after her case turned cold, a mail carrier, trusted by every street he walked. Kenneth Fraser. He was the right age back then, the right proximity, the right unknown history before his postal job. A man who suddenly fit into patterns that no one realized existed until now. His shift into the community had been seamless, almost too seamless. He began his postal career only months after Jessica vanished, passing through neighborhoods that once held her flyers, delivering envelopes to the same city that grieved for her. Walsh dug deeper. In 2001, Kenneth had no steady job, no clear routine, no accountable schedule. His phone records from that period showed something that pulled her pulse tight. On the night Jessica vanished, his phone had gone dark for hours. No calls, no pings, no trace. A quiet hole in time exactly when the world lost sight of Jessica Hamilton. To build a case, Walsh needed proof beyond suspicion. She needed his DNA, but she could not ask him for it directly. She had to gather it the legal way, the careful way, without confrontation, without alerting him. And so began discreet surveillance, unmarked cars, quiet monitoring, routine observation of a man who lived as if life had never asked him a difficult question. He left for work at the same time each morning, delivered mail with the same steady pace, returned home each evening to a quiet house and a familiar routine. He looked like a man who had nothing to fear, nothing to hide, but secrets rarely warned before breaking. Finally, Walsh saw an opening. A coffee shop stopped during a midday route. Kenneth finished his drink, crumpled a cup, wiped his mouth with a napkin, threw it into a trash bin, a moment that seemed ordinary to him. But to Amanda, it was the key that years of waiting had been holding for. Officers retrieved the discarded cup and napkin immediately, preserved them, sealed them, sent them to the lab, and waited as science prepared to speak once more. While the city moved along unaware, while neighbors waved at their mail carrier, while the past believed it might stay buried, a single trash bin held a truth that would soon break 21 silent years wide open. Because once that DNA result returned, there would be no going back, and the life Kenneth Fraser built would meet the secret he thought time had erased. The cup and napkin reached the lab quietly, like any other piece of evidence. But everyone who touched that sealed bag knew it carried 21 years of questions. Technicians worked with focus, running the sample through modern systems that could read every strand, every code, every silent marker. And then at last the machine answered. A full DNA profile, clean, sharp, perfect, compared side by side with the sample from Jessica's car. A match, not partial, not close, exact. Science spoke the truth that time tried to hide. The unknown presence inside her car in 2001 was the same man who sorted envelopes in a postal truck in 2022. Kenneth Fraser. The lab sent the result to the district attorney's office. A simple file carrying the weight of years. Inside a conference room, the result was read once, then again, as if disbelief needed to give space to certainty. There was no popping champagne, no loud reaction, only a heavy stillness. The kind that arrives when long-held doubt finally collapses into fact. Detective Amanda Walsh stood there quietly, feeling a mix of relief and gravity. This was the proof the case had waited decades for, but proof did not erase the grief behind it. Somewhere a sister still woke each morning with loss in her bones, and somewhere else a man lived a life built on the belief that the past would never catch him. Prosecutor Janet Morrison took the file in her hands with calm seriousness. For her, this was not simply about science. It was about telling a story that a jury would understand without hesitation. DNA alone could identify the man, but she knew a case like this needed more than a match. It needed intention. It needed motive. It needed a clear line between a young woman who vanished in 2001 and a man who rebuilt his life without ever looking back. She read through the notes, thinking not only as a lawyer, but as someone who knew the human mind can cling to doubt even when the truth is sitting in front of it. Jurors would ask questions. How could he do something this awful and then live like a good neighbor for 20 years? Could someone truly bury a crime so deeply inside themselves that they never slipped? How do you prove guilt when the suspect himself now looks like the most ordinary man alive? The evidence was scientific, but the battle ahead would be emotional. The world had already seen Kenneth as the friendly mail carrier, the patient coach, the quiet suburban father. Janet had to show them the other version of him, the one who once made a terrible choice in a parking lot under dim lights and then walked away as if nothing happened. And so a silent commitment filled that room. Justice had finally found its compass, but the path forward would demand strength, patience, and a story clear enough to cut through 2 decades of silence and disguise. As files closed and investigators stepped away, there was one thought heavy in the air. How do you prepare a community to face the truth that the neighbor they trusted the most had been living among them with a secret darker than anyone imagined? With the DNA match confirmed, investigators now needed to walk backward through time and rebuild the life Kenneth Fraser lived before he became the quiet mailman everyone trusted. What looked steady and ordinary in 2022 began to look very different when viewed through the lens of 2001. Back then, Kenneth had just left military service. Adjusting to civilian life can be difficult, and his record showed moments of struggle, impatience, and frustration. He lived alone in a small Santa Ana apartment, paying rent through savings and unemployment benefits while searching for steady work. No fixed schedule, no co-workers who would notice if he disappeared for a few hours. No one who would ask where he went at night. He drove a 1994 pickup truck then, old, practical, and large enough to carry anything without drawing attention. DMV records later showed something subtle but important. That truck was sold in late 2002, about a year after Jessica vanished. Then it changed hands multiple times, eventually disappearing from traceable records. The kind of vehicle history that leaves behind more questions than answers. Detectives studied phone logs from 2001. There was nothing unusual at first, just everyday calls scattered across summer days. But on the evening Jessica disappeared, something stood out. Kenneth's phone went silent. Not one call, not one signal. Hours of blank space exactly during the window when Jessica was last seen alive. In a city where patterns mattered, that silence suddenly spoke loudly. They turned next to his early postal records. Something unexpected appeared there too. During his first few months as a mail carrier, Kenneth had specifically requested not to work certain routes. Routes that passed near Jessica's old apartment. Routes that passed near the dental office where she worked. His supervisor believed it was new employee nervousness. Investigators now wondered if it was something else entirely. An instinct to avoid familiar ground. A fear that someone might remember seeing him in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then came the discovery inside his garage after the arrest. A dusty cardboard box tucked behind organized tools. Inside were newspaper clippings about Jessica's disappearance, printed articles, online notes from missing persons sites, and scribbled timelines. Not obsessive enough to look like a compulsion, not casual enough to be innocent curiosity. The page that held the most weight was an entry in a journal, dated 1 year after Jessica vanished. Simple handwriting, heavy meaning. Some mistakes follow you forever, but life does not stop. A sentence that tries to sound reflective, but instead feels like a confession written to no one, hidden where he thought no one would ever look. Piece by piece the picture formed. Not a sudden break, not a single violent life. Instead, a young man facing uncertainty, making a choice in a moment that changed another life forever, and then building a new identity on top of it. Layer by layer, routine by routine, smile by smile, and as all these threads aligned, one chilling truth sat unshakable, while an entire city moved forward believing the past was buried. One man spent 2 decades making sure no one ever learned what he did on that summer night. Once the past could no longer hide, it was time to bring it into the open. Detective Amanda Walsh knew that arrests like this were not about force, but precision, silence, timing. A man who had lived quietly for 21 years would not be given a chance to slip away into another routine morning. The warrant was signed at dawn. Patrol cars waited unseen, tucked into side streets and driveways. The team moved with the calm steadiness of people who understood that one wrong step could change everything. Walsh planned it down to the smallest detail. She studied Kenneth's daily schedule until it became second nature. She knew when he woke up, when he opened his front door, when he pulled on his postal uniform, when he climbed into the truck and sorted envelopes in the front seat. She also knew when his wife left for work. Linda Fraser always drove out just before 8:30, giving a quick wave to whoever happened to be outside that morning. Walsh waited, letting Linda leave. She did not want the wife present when the moment arrived. She wanted to spare her that first shock. By 9 o'clock, Kenneth stepped out to begin his route exactly as he did every weekday. He slid open the side door of the postal truck, stacked letters in neat piles, took a breath in the cool morning air, saw nothing unusual. Just another quiet start on Windchime Lane. Then Detective David Rodriguez approached. Calm voice, badge visible but not threatening. Kenneth looked up, slightly surprised but not alarmed. Walsh watched carefully from a distance, ready for anything. But Kenneth did not run. He did not shout. He did not protest. When Rodriguez told him he was under arrest, he simply looked at the mail in his hands, almost confused that the world around him did not match the reality unfolding before him. He had only one request: I need to call my supervisor and tell him I cannot finish my route today. A normal sentence. In a moment that was anything but normal. It made Walsh's chest tighten. Years of secrets, and his instinct was still to protect his routine. That quiet responsibility somehow made everything feel heavier. Neighbors began stepping outside, drawn by movement and the kind of stillness that tells you something important is happening. Puzzled faces at first, then concern, then disbelief so sharp it almost stung to witness. They watched the familiar figure with the friendly smile being gently turned and placed in handcuffs. The same man who delivered Christmas cards and chatted about school fundraisers. The same man who waved to children riding their scooters. A man who fit into their trust like a key in a lock. Confusion turned into something else. A slow dawning horror, a fragile realization that safety had never been a wall, only a curtain. Then, in the middle of it all, a car turned onto the street. Linda Fraser, home early to let their dog out and prepare dinner for later. She slowed when she saw the police cars, pulled closer, stopped, and in that single instant her expression shifted from routine comfort to a shattering no one ever prepares for. Her eyes searched the scene, found Kenneth, found the handcuffs, found the truth without a word spoken. Some heartbreaks do not scream. They collapse quietly like breath leaving the room. Kenneth lowered his head as officers guided him into the unmarked car. Walsh stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight in the air. Ordinary life did not return, not yet. It hovered uncertain, as if the whole street needed to relearn how to breathe after watching the illusion of safety fall apart. The door closed. The engine started. The car rolled away, carrying a past that could no longer hide, and a man who had lived too long inside a borrowed identity. And in the silence that followed, one question hung above every carefully trimmed lawn on that peaceful street. If evil can sit quietly at your door for 20 years without a single crack showing, how do you ever trust what calm looks like again? At the station, the world around Kenneth Fraser finally shifted from suburban comfort to fluorescent lights and steel doors. Officers took his fingerprints, photographed him, and logged every item in his pockets. He stood still through it all, hands steady, expression unreadable. Not fear, not anger, something stranger. A quiet, heavy acceptance, as though he had been waiting for this moment longer than anyone else in the room. When the booking officer asked if he understood, Kenneth nodded with a calm that felt unsettling. Like a man exhaling after holding his breath for years. There was no panic, no outburst, almost a sense of relief, as if the secret he carried had finally grown too heavy to keep standing on his shoulders. Even the officer processing him would later say, it did not feel like bringing in a dangerous criminal. It felt like watching someone finally surrender to truth. But outside those walls there was no calm. One neighbor lifted their phone that morning and recorded the arrest. Just a few seconds of footage, a postal uniform, handcuffs, police cars lined along Wind Chime Lane. A stunned wife frozen beside her car door. When that clip hit social media, the story exploded. First in Irvine, then Orange County, then across the country. News headlines appeared almost instantly. Trusted mail carrier arrested in connection to 20-year-old cold case. DNA breakthrough leads to shocking suburban arrest. People who once waved to Kenneth from front porches now stared at their screens in disbelief. Screenshots of his smiling coaching photos spread online. Posts poured in from parents whose children he once coached in youth soccer. Words like kind, helpful, patient filled the comments. Shock collided with horror as the world tried to understand how someone who lived so gently could be tied to something so dark. Reporters arrived on Wind Chime Lane within hours. Microphones against fences, cameras pointed at front doors. Quiet, peaceful mornings replaced by vans and whispered interviews. A neighborhood once proud of calm now felt exposed and fragile. Residents who once left garage doors open while watering plants now double-latched them. Parents who once waved at mail carriers with trust now watched from windows before stepping outside. Fear does not always shout. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in changed routines, in glances over the shoulder, on streets that once felt perfectly safe. And here, on a street designed to feel untouched by danger, trust cracked like glass under pressure. People walked their dogs differently, slower, eyes scanning. They spoke with neighbors more quietly, less casually, because no one knew how to return to innocence once innocence had been proven breakable. And through the hum of news vans and the soft echo of police radios, one thought swept through the minds of everyone who once believed safety was guaranteed if the smiling face at your mailbox could hide a nightmare. What else has been standing quietly in plain sight all these years? Inside a small interview room, the kind built not for drama but for truth, Kenneth Fraser sat at a metal table. The bright postal uniform that once symbolized trust now looked out of place under the stark office light. His hands rested quietly, fingers interlaced, like a man waiting for news he already knew. Detective Amanda Walsh entered without raising her voice or her presence. No aggression, no slamming files. She understood something important. The goal was not to break him with force. It was to bring the truth into the room with patience and weight. She read him his rights, each word steady. He nodded. He understood. He did not protest. He did not deny. He simply listened, as if this moment had been waiting on a calendar only he could see. Walsh did not begin with accusation. She began with Jessica. She talked about her life, her gentle hopes, her work at the dental office, her dreams of becoming a teacher. She spoke of the night she disappeared, the empty car left behind, the voicemail from a sister who still believed she would call back. She spoke of Patricia and how loss settled into her life like a shadow that refused to move. Each detail pressed softly against the silence, and something in Kenneth's posture changed. A small shift, barely visible but real. He blinked more slowly. His shoulders drew inward. When Walsh placed photographs on the table, Jessica smiling in sunlight, Patricia holding posters during search efforts, a quiet tremor passed through his breath. For years he had compartmentalized. He had sealed this memory in a place no one could see. But grief has gravity, and the truth, once summoned, rarely leaves without a voice. I never wanted her sister to live like that. The words came out low, strained, as if pulled from somewhere deep inside him. Not loud, not dramatic, a fracture, not a break. And in that fracture the past began to climb out. He spoke slowly. First in scattered thoughts, then clearer, like someone unsealing a memory brick by brick. He said he had been drinking that night. Angry at life, restless, drifting through Orange County without direction. He noticed Jessica at a light near the Spectrum Center. Something in that moment caught him, something he could not explain even now. He followed her into the parking lot. He approached her car, pretending to ask for help, trying to seem harmless. She trusted him at first. A parking lot. A stranger who did not look threatening. Then a shift, a misunderstanding that turned into fear. Jessica resisted. She fought. Panic surged. What he thought would be a moment became a struggle. And then a final stillness he never expected, never planned, and never knew how to undo. He said he froze, too afraid to call for help, too scared to face what he had done. Panic drove him more than cruelty. He drove her car with her inside, miles away, into the quiet dark of the Cleveland National Forest. He dug shallow ground with shaking hands, covered her, marked the spot in a way only he would recognize. Then he walked back to civilization, returned her car to the Spectrum, wiped what he thought mattered, and vanished into the night he had broken. When he finished speaking, he did not defend himself. He did not plead innocence. He simply stared at the table. A man who built an ordinary life over extraordinary guilt. Who tried to bury the past by becoming someone better, but never escaped the echo of what he did. Walsh listened without flinching. She let silence settle around his words. Not triumph, not anger, only recognition. The truth once loose filled the room. A 21-year shadow finally shaped into reality. And as Kenneth leaned back, eyes tired and voice empty, one chilling fact hung in the air. A peaceful neighborhood slept soundly for 2 decades, never knowing that a secret grave waited in the mountains, and the man who buried it walked their streets each morning. Once the truth was spoken aloud, the mission changed. It was no longer only about confession. It was about bringing Jessica home. The Cleveland National Forest stretched wide and unforgiving, a place where memory and terrain could easily swallow secrets forever. Yet now investigators had something they never had before: coordinates, a direction. A final piece of guidance from a man who had buried his past under pine needles and earth. In early 2023, the search teams moved into the forest at first light. Trained cadaver dogs padded through tall brush. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the soil for subtle shifts. Forensic anthropologists marked the land in careful grids. These were not just experts. They were guardians of truth, people who worked not for noise but for closure. The weather fought them. Cold wind cut through layers of clothing. Dirt hardened under frost. Roots twisted through soil like nature's attempt to protect what lay beneath. But patience in these moments was not weakness. It was respect. Every inch mattered. Every shovel of earth had meaning. Hours became days. The team dug with hands more than tools by the end, brushing soil grain by grain. And then, just as dawn streaked pale light through the trees on the 6th day, a dog stilled its breath and lowered its head. Quiet recognition. A signal. Soon after, human remains were uncovered, bones resting in silence where they had been placed more than 20 years before. Stillness settled around the site. Not shock, not surprise, a solemn understanding that the past was finally giving up what it had held too long. The excavation unfolded with reverence. No hurried motions. Gloves steady, brushes soft, cameras recording every step, so nothing could ever again be erased or doubted. Small artifacts surfaced too, a fragment of clothing, a weather-worn rosary charm. Each piece a reminder of a life interrupted, not forgotten. Jessica Hamilton was lifted from the earth with care that felt closer to ceremony than procedure. Investigators bowed their heads without instruction. For them, this was not only evidence. This was a daughter, a sister, her dreamer whose path had been cut short in the quiet hours of one August night. Everything recovered was sealed, documented, and sent to the lab. Because when justice walks into a courtroom, it must carry proof in its hands, not only in its heart. Walsh stood watching as the final bag was sealed, breath visible in the cold morning air. There was no celebration, only the heavy release of a truth that finally had form. With the forest silent again and the earth closed behind them, one thought followed everyone who walked back to the trucks. Even the deepest ground cannot hold a secret forever when love refuses to stop searching. When the case reached the courtroom, it did not arrive quietly. The name People versus Kenneth Fraser echoed far beyond Orange County. News crews filled sidewalks. Courtroom seats filled before sunrise. Reporters leaned forward like they were listening for a pulse in a story that had already shaken a community to its core. This trial was not about who did it. The confession, the DNA, the evidence in the forest, all of it stood firm. There was no mystery left about guilt. What remained was a question that made even the most seasoned observers uneasy. What do you do with a man who committed one unimaginable act, then spent 20 years living like the model of decency? Prosecutors described a life built on a lie, a quiet mask worn every day, covering a truth that never decayed. Defense attorneys painted a different picture. A broken young veteran lost in a moment of panic, who then tried to spend the rest of his life making amends in silence. It was the kind of argument that made jurors sit straighter, hearts pulled one way while duty tugged in the other. Jury selection stretched on. Not because they needed people without opinions, but because they needed people who could hold two truths in their minds at once. That someone could do terrible harm and also genuinely help others. That goodness, when born from guilt, can be real yet still not erase what came before. Each juror faced their own inner reckoning. Could they judge not just a crime but a life split in two? Inside the courtroom, Kenneth sat quietly beside his defense attorney. No tears, no dramatic displays, just the steady presence of a man who understood that the world now saw every moment of his past through a single act. His wife did not sit behind him anymore. She watched from a distance on most days, still unable to fully reconcile the husband she knew with the stranger revealed beneath him. Detective Walsh sat among the law enforcement team, eyes steady, posture unbroken. She knew trials are not only about facts. They're about the human heart, and how tightly it clings to comfort, even when truth tears comfort apart. She watched each juror as they listened to openings, saw the moments when compassion flickered, and the moments when outrage hardened back into resolve. For the first time since the arrest, society itself became a kind of witness. People debated. Some whispered that he had redeemed himself. Others said no amount of good deeds can balance what was taken from Jessica and Patricia. One life stolen cannot be repaid by 2 decades of normal days. And through it all, the courtroom carried a quiet current, an unasked question that held everyone in its grip when a person hides darkness inside a life that looks full of kindness. Which version do we judge and which one do we fear? When Patricia Hamilton took the stand, the courtroom shifted. People who had been leaning forward suddenly sat still. Even the hum of cameras outside felt distant, muted by the weight of what she carried into that room. She did not enter like someone seeking punishment. She entered like someone who had spent 22 years holding her life together, with memory and hope. Her voice was soft at first, like it needed a moment to climb back through decades of silence. But then it steadied. Not with anger, not with rage, but with a kind of strength that only grief can carve into a person. She spoke about Jessica in the present tense before correcting herself, each correction another reminder of what time had taken. She talked about laughter that once filled their small apartment on Culver Drive, about how Jessica Color coded her study notes, how she collected postcards from places she dreamed of visiting one day. Patricia remembered the sound of Jessica humming absent-mindedly while cooking dinner, and the way she always left sticky notes with reminders and encouragement. Then she spoke about the night everything changed, the unanswered call, the voicemail she kept on her phone long after technology should have erased it, the panic that crawled through her bones as hours passed. She described posting flyers in late summer heat until her hands blistered, and walking into police stations with hope and fear tangled around every sentence. Her parents, she said, never recovered. They died without answers, without a grave to visit, without peace. The grief did not fade for them. It froze, suspended like a breath held too long. They kept Jessica's room untouched for years, dusting shelves no one used, opening windows in a room no one returned to. Patricia told the jury she never married, not because she did not want to, but because part of her could never move forward while her sister remained missing behind her. Life paused in ways small and large. Birthdays became days of aching. Holidays grew quieter. Plans for the future stayed folded in a drawer. She built her life around the possibility that maybe Jessica would walk through a door one day, tired, hurt, confused, but alive. She talked about how the community helped at first. The search groups, the vigils, the prayers whispered in grocery store aisles. But life in Irvine kept growing. Streets expanded. New families moved in. And slowly, Jessica's picture stopped appearing on bulletin boards. New tragedies arrived. New stories surfaced. Only Patricia stayed anchored to that August night, unable to step into a world that seemed to move on without her. When she looked toward Kenneth Fraser, her face did not twist with hatred. It stayed steady. Her eyes held sorrow deeper than anger. She said she believed in justice, not revenge. She told the jury she had waited more than half her life for truth. Truth did not heal everything, but it let her breathe again. Breathe without the sharp edge of wondering, and then with a tremor that came not from fear but from a kind of release, she said she could finally visit Jessica. Not in memory, not in hope, but at a place where her sister rested in peace, not in question. You did not just take her life. You reshaped mine. The words hung in the air like a quiet bell. No yelling, no shaking voice, just truth, as heavy and clear as morning light. When she stepped down, the room stayed still, as if movement would disrespect the weight of her story. Because in that moment, everyone understood something deeper than a verdict or a sentence. They saw the cost of 22 years of not knowing, and the strength it takes to keep living when your heart waits for footsteps that never return. And as she returned to her seat, one shared thought lived in every silent breath. When grief becomes the shape of a life, what does it take to finally let go of the waiting and begin to live again? When Kenneth Fraser took the witness stand, the courtroom shifted again. Not from noise, but from tension so still it felt like every breath waited. He was not in a postal uniform anymore. Just a plain gray suit, hands folded back straight, eyes heavy with something that resembled exhaustion more than defiance. There was no dramatic entrance, no attempt to clear his throat or brace himself. He simply sat, as if everything that brought him here had already consumed whatever energy he once had for fighting. His attorney asked the first questions softly, giving him room to speak, not perform. Kenneth's voice was steady but low, as though each word carried weight he had been dragging for years. He did not change his story. He did not offer a new version. Everything he said aligned with his confession. He spoke about that night, about feeling lost after leaving the Navy, about drinking too much, about a moment of fixation he still could not fully understand, and about panic that did not fade, but hardened into decades of silence. He said the choices he made that night broke something inside him. He said he tried to build a life that looked good because he could not undo what he had done, not to escape accountability, but because he believed in some desperate corner of his mind that living a better life was the only thing left he could offer the world. He did not ask for sympathy. He did not defend himself. His voice never rose, never cracked into anger or self-pity. His tone held regret, not argument. Then came the moment everyone knew would test every heart in the room. Kenneth turned slightly toward Patricia Hamilton. His words came slow, careful, as if he knew he had no right to speak her name, and did so only because truth demanded it. I know I cannot return her to you. I know that nothing I say fixes anything. I am sorry. There was no sobbing, no dramatic trembling, just sincerity that felt raw enough to unsettle even those who believed he deserved the harshest punishment. Patricia did not look away. She listened. Her face remained calm, but her eyes held the memory of 22 years of waiting. She did not nod. She did not respond. Some wounds do not answer apologies. Some apologies exist only to show that a soul finally stopped hiding. Then Prosecutor Janet Morrison rose. Her tone did not shake, but there was steel beneath every word. She questioned not the confession, but the years afterward. She painted his quiet life not as redemption, but as deception. 20 years of smiles delivered alongside letters. 20 years of children trusting a man who once made a choice that ended a life. 20 years of family barbecues and morning paper deliveries, while another family sat at kitchen tables, with a chair forever empty. She asked him if every friendly wave felt like pretending, if every youth soccer practice reminded him of a life he stole, if every Christmas morning, when families opened gifts he delivered, he thought of the Christmases Jessica never lived to see. Her questions did not yell. They sliced. They forced the room to confront an uncomfortable truth. Good deeds done in the shadow of a terrible act cannot erase the act, and sometimes they make the shadow even longer. Kenneth did not argue. He did not flinch. He sat with it. A man who had already accepted that truth had finally caught up to him. As he stepped down from the stand, the courtroom felt suspended between two forces: the instinct to see the humanity of a remorseful man, and the unshakable reality that remorse does not reverse harm. And one silent thought settled over everyone listening: when a person carries guilt as quietly as a heartbeat, does the weight ever truly lift, or does it simply wait for the moment when truth finally demands to be paid? The courtroom did not slow down after Kenneth left the stand. If anything, the air grew heavier. Now facts moved to the forefront, cold, precise, unblinking. Prosecutor Janet Morrison began laying out evidence piece by piece, each item a quiet reminder that truth does not fade with time, it waits. Large screens lit up. Images from the Cleveland National Forest appeared. Not dramatic, not sensational, just earth, roots, layers of soil and markers where bones were found. Calm photographs, but the silence as they appeared felt louder than shouting. Each picture told the story Kenneth had tried to bury. The rosary charm, the clothing fibers, soil bagged and labeled, bones lifted gently from the ground by gloved hands. A crime scene frozen across decades, now speaking with unmistakable clarity. Lab reports followed. DNA results, trace material recovered from the car, soil matching samples from the burial site. Every line tied one life to another. Not theory, not speculation. Science anchoring tragedy to proof. Investigators described the process calmly, voices steady, almost clinical. But every juror leaned forward, eyes fixed, because when the truth is built with patience, it becomes unshakable. Then came the experts. A forensic psychologist for the state spoke first. She did not call Kenneth a monster. She did not need to. Her voice stayed even as she explained something unsettling. Not madness, not impulse alone, but a capacity for compartmentalization that allowed him to separate one horrific act from a life that looked generous, friendly, ordinary. She suggested that such separation pointed to traits not of redemption, but of danger, hidden behind routine. A person able to bury guilt so deeply could carry darkness silently for years. The defense countered with their own expert, a calm man who spoke of trauma, transition, and the complexity of human change. He talked about the sudden loss of structure after military service, about psychological breaking points. He did not excuse the act, but he argued that Kenneth's years of good behavior might not be disguise. They could be remorse turned into daily discipline, the man trying in the only way he knew to become better than the worst moment of his life. Two experts, two truths held in tension. One viewed Kenneth's quiet life as a mask. The other saw it as penance. Jurors exchanged glances that were not dramatic but troubled. They were not deciding if a crime happened. That part was done. They were being asked something harder. Can a person change? And if change is real, does it matter when a life has been taken? Because guilt existed in pieces now, not just in the bones in the forest, not just in the tearful apology, but in 20 years of delivering mail and coaching children and smiling at neighbors, while a grave lay hidden beneath trees miles away. Evidence can prove what happened. Experts can suggest why, but only the jury could decide what justice looks like when a man's life split in two, and both halves demanded to be judged. And as they listened, each juror quietly faced the question that echoes through every case where time and truth collide, when the past and the present do not match. Which version of a person does the world hold accountable? The jury filed back into the courtroom after 6 long days of deliberation, each face carrying the quiet weight of duty. The room held its breath. Reporters froze mid-scribble. Patricia clasped her hands in her lap, eyes closed for a moment, steadying herself. Kenneth sat still, shoulders tense, as though one final thread held him upright. The verdict form was passed to the clerk, Paper rustled softly. Then the words that would seal the journey of 22 years finally surfaced. Guilty of second-degree murder. No dramatic outburst followed. No cries or gasps. Just the sound of a truth landing in the room, heavy and undeniable. Kenneth exhaled long and deep, as if tension that had lived inside him for decades finally loosened its grip. He did not drop his head in despair. He did not protest. He simply sat there, absorbing the life that now waited for him. Patricia did not cry. Her reaction was a quiet, trembling breath. Relief and sorrow blended into something deeper. Justice did not erase grief, but it finally gave it shape. She unclenched her hands slowly, almost as if releasing 22 years of holding on to hope, fear, and memory all at once. Weeks later, the courtroom filled again for sentencing. Judge Sarah Nakamura presided with calm clarity, a judge known not only for strength but for balance. She acknowledged the case was unlike others, not a serial predator, not a man who continued harm, but still a young life stolen, a future erased, a family altered forever. The judge spoke of accountability, of choices made in panic that do not excuse consequence, of years lived productively that did not erase what lay in the dirt of a forest. She delivered her ruling with steady resolve. 25 years to life, parole eligibility after 20 years, a sentence that mirrored the span of years Kenneth walked free. Not a punishment designed to crush, not a mercy designed to forget. Instead, a recognition that justice lives not only in punishment, but in truth acknowledged and harm named aloud. Kenneth nodded once. No tears, no argument, just acceptance. He knew what he had carried, and now the world carried it with him. Patricia looked forward, not triumphant, but finally grounded. She had answers. She had a place to visit her sister. She had a verdict that spoke her pain aloud. And she had a moment to breathe without wondering what happened in the dark so many years ago. For the courtroom, it marked an ending. For the people who lived inside the story, it marked something more complicated. There are sentences that cage a body, and there are sentences that free a memory. This case did both, and as Kenneth was led away, and Patricia stood with her sister's absence, finally given voice. A question lingered quietly in every heart that listened when justice arrived so late. Is it closure or simply the first moment when wounds finally stop fighting to be seen? The courtroom lights dimmed behind everyone, but the story did not end there. Justice had spoken. Yet life after justice is its own kind of journey. Patricia walked out of that building with tears on her face, not of triumph but of release. She did not forgive Kenneth. She did not pretend to. Forgiveness is not a ribbon you tie around loss. But she had something she fought 2 decades to find. Truth. And truth, even when painful, lets a soul finally rest. Jessica finally received the farewell she deserved. A quiet church in Orange County opened its doors to faces young and old, some who knew her well, some who only knew her story. There were no long speeches, no dramatic music, just a soft prayer, a handful of flowers and a gravestone with gentle words carved into marble. Jessica Hamilton, 1978 to 2001, beloved sister, finally home. People stood around the grave longer than they needed to, not because they did not know what to do, but because letting go of hope means holding memory instead. Patricia placed her hand on the stone before leaving, a gesture that said goodbye and thank you all at once. Back on Windchime Lane, life changed in subtle ways. Doors that once stayed open during warm afternoons now closed softly. Parents who once waved from porches now walked children to the curb. Trust did not disappear, but it learned caution. Neighbors still greeted each other, but there was a pause in their smiles, a quiet question hidden inside every glance. Because safety, everyone realized, is not guaranteed by peaceful streets or trimmed lawns. Safety is sometimes an illusion, built on what we choose not to see. The Postal Service reviewed its hiring systems and training, not because they believed dozens of dangers walked in male uniforms, but because one was enough to shatter certainty. And Linda, who had once stood beside Kenneth at backyard barbecues and school fundraisers, filed for divorce. Yet she visited him sometimes, not out of love unchanged, but because confusion and heartbreak do not vanish when truth arrives. Sometimes loyalty does not end, it simply learns distance. Detective Amanda Walsh sat with her thoughts more often after the trial. She had seen darkness before. But there was something different about evil that wears ordinary faces. Something unsettling about the idea that a man could coach children's soccer in the morning and bury a memory in the mountains at night. She looked at Irvine differently now. Planned streets, perfect lawns, safety by design. And she knew what the case had proven. You can build the safest city in America, but you cannot engineer the human heart technology solved what time could not. Forensics that did not exist in 2001 delivered justice in 2022. A hair strand that once meant nothing became a voice for the silent. If resources and persistence had not aligned, Jessica might have remained only a name on old. Flyers and fading hope, the question that hovered quietly in the minds of everyone who followed the story, refused to leave. If a gentle smile and steady routine could hide a grave for 21 years here, how many other secrets rest quietly behind the fences and mailboxes of calm neighborhoods? Justice arrived late, but it arrived. The truth rose through years of silence, and a promise made by a sister was finally fulfilled. Jessica did not vanish into forgotten air. She came home. If you are still watching this story, it means this journey stayed with you, and this story deserves your like. So please like this video and subscribe to Unscripted Tales, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss our upcoming true stories. My mother set a challenge for you to complete 5,000 likes on this story, so help me reach that goal. It is totally free. And tell me in the comments from which city you are watching this cold case story.